Through interviews from London to Los Angeles, I hope this podcast will inspire you to embrace your wild side. To keep up with my wild adventures, follow me at susielindow.com. You can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Enjoy the show. Hello, Wild Riders. Welcome to the Wild Side. I'm your host, Susie Lindow. I really enjoyed today's interview. When I first spoke with Kyla Duffy, I learned that her wild side would surpass most people's wildest dreams. But little did I know that her drive to strive would lead to accomplishments in athletic, intellectual, and business endeavors. Kyla talks about when she went to gymnastics camp and met Tony Hawk. She started skateboarding and her first business, Basement Skates. From there, her mother encouraged her to compete in a snowboarding competition without knowing how, and she won. She has some wild stories about joining a team in Vermont and being homeschooled. After a few close calls, she quit snowboarding and focused on academic and business pursuits. While she taught classes at the University of Colorado, she got the opportunity to become a trapeze artist. Did I mention that she's afraid of heights? If you've ever let fear get in the way of a goal or you're having a hard time motivating, this episode is for you. Enjoy! Kyla Duffy's career in board sports began at Camp Woodward in Pennsylvania. Although she signed up for girls' gymnastics, she switched to boys' skateboarding. Defying gender roles kicked off a career in skateboarding and snowboarding that lasted almost a decade. As a professional snowboarder, Kyla competed in big air, slopestyle, and halfpipe. As one of the top female competitors, she was 7th in the U.S. and 20th in the world and was an alternate during the Olympic pre-trials when snowboarding debuted in 1998. Upon retiring, she pursued multiple degrees, including a Bachelor of Arts in Spanish, a Bachelor of Science in Marketing, and a Master's in Human Resources. After founding and launching a very successful natural snack food company and selling rock climbing walls, Kyla published more than 35 books to encourage people to foster and adopt dogs. She donated the $70,000 profit to rescues. She also produced and performed a one-woman stage show about dog rescue twice. Kyla's master's thesis about the lack of sales education and higher learning institutions caught the attention of the University of Colorado in Boulder, who enlisted her as a teacher. During that time, she took up flying trapeze as a hobby, which soon grew into a passion. Kyla met Harmony French-Shoot, an accomplished flyer and one of the stars of PBS's Circus show. Harmony planned to perform with a team in Japan, and she asked Kyla to join them. This launched a nearly 7-year circus career where she met her husband, accomplished unprecedented feats, and lived her dreams. Welcome to the show, Kyla.
Thank you so much for having me today, Susie. It's such a pleasure to be talking with you.
With everything that you've accomplished, I'm dying to hear your definition of wild.
It's funny listening to you introduce me. I'm thinking my life makes no sense. But yeah, I'm really glad you asked me that question because what it brought to mind at first was when parents say their children are wild, and it's kind of like a negative connotation that they're like rabid beasts. And then I thought more about it. And when I think about wild, what is it really? What do wild animals do? Well, they follow their intuition. They live without a cage and they take calculated measures as they navigate their lives. And I think that really does define me. And maybe that's the thing. That's the common thread throughout all the weirdness of my career.
And then I have to believe that with your extraordinary background, that you have all kinds of wild stories to tell.
Yeah, it's been a trip down memory lane and thinking about doing this podcast with you and thinking about all the crazy things that have happened in my life and how do you pick and choose, right? So I was thinking, what is my earliest memory? And one thing that came to mind, as you mentioned, I started skateboarding after going to gymnastics camp in Pennsylvania at Woodward. And the funny thing about that, my parents came to pick me up. I went to gymnastics camp as a buttoned up, hair up, typical gymnast looking person. Yeah, exactly. The perfectly, well, maybe my hair was never perfect, but I tried my best. Anyway, while I was there, I met the boys. Here's one stupid story from that. Tony Hawk was there. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Tony Hawk, right? He was there, and I was this young girl who was hanging out with all the boys and skateboarding. And I was surprising that I was as good as I was because I was a girl. I was good for a girl. I was okay for a human being, but that was really good for a girl. But anyway, Tony Hawk kind of took a liking to me, and this was when he was pretty young. I mean, this was the 25 years ago. This is no more than that, like 30 years ago. This was a long time ago, but. Anyway, Tony Hawk asked me, he said, do you want to come get lunch with us? Me and the New Deal team, or whoever it was at the time, are going to get lunch. Do you want to go get lunch? And you know what I said? I said, no, I'm not allowed. What a moron to say, no, I'm not allowed. But anyway, he brought gummy worms back for me. So that was very, very sweet. But what I was going to say was so funny is we actually have it on film. My dad picking me up from skateboard camp, my mom and dad. And my dad's filming and he's watching a kid walk up the hill in giant pajamas, clothes that are way too big, frizzy hair, looking crazy. And he literally says, I'm glad that's not my kid. And guess who it was? It was a major adjustment. But the next year I went back as a skateboarder. And by then I had actually started a skateboard shop in my basement, which was, it was called, a funny story there, it was called Basement Skates, but it was spelled Baesment, because the kid that made the stickers didn't know how to spell and spelled basement wrong. So from then on, we were basement skates. Yes. But anyway, I had my little skateboard shop, so I brought a trunk of skateboard stuff with me to skateboard camp to sell. You can imagine the camp wasn't thrilled about that because I was undercutting their store that they were selling stuff out of. But I ended up leaving camp with more money in my commissary account that I showed up with. And it was so cool. I brought, at the time, Manic Panic hair dye was all the rage. And so I bought a lot of Manic Panic hair dye, and I would charge kids like $7 to dye a strand of their hair. And I also remember it was the time of hypercolor clothing. I don't know if you remember that clothing, but it changed color when it was hot. And we used to actually get into the dryer and like brace ourselves in the dryer and spin around. Plus, we have dryers and no can't do that. Well, you're probably not supposed to, but we actually did do that. And the clothing would change color. It would be a different color when you got in than when you got out. So those are some fun memories from skateboard camp. But that was kind of the beginning of board sports for me. And then when I was 15, I had gone snowboarding maybe twice. We lived in New Jersey. It wasn't like it was a snowboarding mecca. We lived in South Jersey in Atlantic City. No snowboarding. So my parents would take me out, on vacation to Colorado or wherever, and I'd snowboard a little. But when I was 15, we went to a trampoline contest at Wilburger Ski Shop in Delaware. And the kids were jumping on the trampoline on their snowboards, and the winner was going to get sponsored by the ski shop. And my mom was like, you got to do this. I was like, I'm not going to do it. I don't know how to snowboard. But because I was a gymnast, I could clearly jump on a trampoline. So I strapped on someone's snowboard, jumped on the trampoline, and I won the competition.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
So that's how I got it. That video is funny too. My mom's filming it. It's snowing. She's out the skylight of the car going, yay, Kyla, yay. So funny. My mom is my biggest fan. She's amazing. But anyway, so I got sponsored that day. They had no idea I didn't know how to snowboard. I guess I didn't really know I didn't know how to snowboard either, because they started taking me to competitions and I would win them all. Why? Because I was the only person in the girls division.
Oh, but I can't imagine, for listeners out there, viewers, you have to understand, snowboarding isn't easy in the beginning. There's this huge leap in how to manage your board when you're going downhill, and it's super hard in the beginning, and then it gets easier. So how did you do that without falling all the time?
But yeah, you're right. I see that. So note to you listeners, if you are going to the mountains and you're only going for a few days, I highly recommend you ski because it's way easier to have a fun time and get down the hill on skis. Whereas snowboarding does take an upfront investment. I think in the long run, it's fun and less cumbersome because in the short term, if you're only going for a few days, better to ski. I have always been a very driven person. So if I set my mind to something, like there's no way it's not going to happen. I just, how lucky was I that I was 15? I was getting pulled out of school for these snowboard competitions. I was like hanging out with the boys, which I definitely thought was cool. And I felt really fortunate. I was grateful for what I had. And I really enjoy striving towards goals. I like sports that are goal oriented, where, you learn one thing and now it's time to learn something else. And not just kind of an incremental change, but like a big change. So I just always enjoyed it. But when I went to Vermont for the first time for a competition, I got my butt handed to me. There was this girl, I'll never forget, Aurelie Sayers. She was actually in the Olympics the first time around, I think. I think she was in the first time around. Anyway, she was from Vermont Mountain School or something. It's a boarding school for kids in Stratton, which in retrospect might have been a good idea for me to have a little bit of structure. Anyway, those kids were good. They had good coaching. I don't know how well they did in school, but they had good coaching for snowboarding. I got up there and I knew she was going to do a 360 on the jump. Now, I didn't know how to do a 360, but for sure I was going to do 540 because I had to win. What was back when bindings were not very good. I go off the jump. Somehow I catch my edge, my foot rips out of my snowboard, the snowboard out of the binding, my snowboard hits me in the head and knocks me out cold. This was my first real snowboard, like big air competition. And when I say big air, it was like 10 feet. But I got knocked out and I was out for like a minute. It was real. It was like a real concussion. Of course, being 16 or whatever it was, I thought that was so cool that I just got a concussion. That's classic. Totally classic. So anyway, at that point though, I realized I really need to learn how to snowboard if this is what I'm going to be doing. So I had to convince my parents to let me go on homeschool. I got to tell you, my mom was a professional ice skater. She was in Holiday on Ice. Yeah, you should talk with her someday. She's a very adventurous spirit. She's 81 years old, still ice skating. She's amazing. And she's in Boulder. So anyway, if you meet her, you'll know because she'll be talking about me. This is so funny. But anyway, she was super supportive. She would take me to all the competitions and she was very fit. And I remember at one point she had a little like funky spun suit and she's standing by the half pipe and this kid sitting next to me goes, I want a piece of that. Yeah, that's my fit. Oh, that's my bud. That was so funny. But anyway, so she was all for me doing this. I was a very good student. I for sure could handle being in charge of my own destiny with school. And at the time, so you got to remember this was the 90s. Kids didn't do homeschool, only for like religious reasons or whatever. Normal kids didn't do homeschool. I did homeschool because I didn't have time to go to school. Luckily, this woman, Nancy Rhodes, she was a retired school marm in all sense of the word. She went to my dad and she pushed up her glasses and she said, Dennis, you're going to let Kyla go on homeschool and I'm going to help her. And then she went outside and smoked a cigarette. My dad had no choice. So I did go on homeschool and I would get a ride up to Vermont and then my ride would leave and I'd be stuck up there. The show was good I was on homeschool so I could actually do my work. And I slept on these guys' couch. The house was called E Street. It was a pretty it's famous in the history books for snowboard culture of that time. And I used to sleep on their couch and man, we were so crazy. My day was like this. I would wake up, around like 9 or 10, whatever, go get a bagel and a latte, go up to the mountain, do some snowboarding, come back, maybe take a nap, play some video games, do my schoolwork, and then play some more video games. And then we would go in midnight, drive around and shoot signs with paintball guns. And then go to Dunkin' Donuts for the fresh donuts at 2 a.m. That was my life. It was so funny. And we were always playing pranks on each other. Like, I remember one time One time my friends duct taped me to a chair. And this was in the time when we were really into paintball guns. So they duct taped me to a chair and thought I couldn't get out. Well, and then they went back to their video games. Well, I got out. I actually like hopped around the house. I remember I fell over in the bathroom and somehow I wiggled myself out. But there was a loaded paintball gun on the counter. And so I went and got that paintball gun and I went out, I took it outside and I thought I unloaded it once. Like I shot the ball out once and I thought it was unloaded. Well, I come back inside and my friend's sitting on the chair like, I'm not going to do anything about that. He just duct taped me to a chair. So I came in, aimed the gun and fired thinking that it didn't have a paintball in it. Well, turns out it did. You're close range. My God, luckily he was reading a magazine because it would have hit him right in the forehead and exploded all over the wall. Oh my God. Those are the kind of antics we were involved in all the time.
You also got into skateboarding. Of course, you had your Tony Hawk connection there. Did you connect with him when you started competing in skateboarding?
You know, over the years, we've kept in touch a little bit, but not... I wouldn't say he was in my circle of friends. Andy McDonald and I were a little bit closer. He also was I think, skateboarding in the Olympics. I think he was in the Olympics. I don't really follow it anymore. Anyway, he's pretty famous. A lot of those guys were in my circle, you know. So snowboarding and skateboarding kind of evolved together. Snowboarding, I was doing the X Games and those kind of things with snowboarding. Skateboarding, I wasn't quite as involved in, but I did the big ramps, the vert ramps. That was kind of my thing. And I was good at mini ramps. I wasn't really a street skater. But yeah, so skateboarding was a big part of my life. In terms of professional life, snowboarding was more so. I was sponsored by a few companies for skateboarding, but not quite as much.
Okay, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I guess let's wrap up snowboarding by saying I was sitting in a hotel room in a place called, I think the town is called Crap. Yeah, it's called Locks. I'm not sure if the mountain is Locks or the town is Locks, but something is called Crap. Anyway, I was sitting in our hotel room. We were meant to go in a heli trip that day, and I remember just like wishing that we were going to be snowed in. I did not want to go, and I was afraid I was going to die. And what was happening was I kept getting pushed into these situations that had a lot of avalanche danger, and being from the East Coast, I was woefully unprepared for avalanche situations. So for example, Colorado, so I got sponsored by Copper Mountain in 98 or 1999, and I moved out to Colorado. Ended up riding Breckenridge all the time, but I was doing photo shoots out there. And one of the most dangerous places in Colorado is behind the Eisenhower Tunnel. I did not know that, and I just blindly followed this photographer who promised he was going to take care of me up into the mountains back there. There were 3 of us that day. And one guy was on the south-facing side, and we were on like the other side, and you know, we were hiking up without our boards on because we were going up to the top. And I was hiking up the middle of a face, which seriously, Kyla, why would you do that? And the guy on the other side, we all had radios. The guy on the other side, what happened? So first, I felt the ground shift under me. And I immediately just like gingerly turned around, sat down and started putting my board on and just was like crying and really felt like this was the end of my life. And then the guy on the other face went down and it slid behind him. So I still had to get down, and I went down, and luckily it was all right. It was just a little bit of slough for me, but those experiences started building up for me, and I just realized that I don't want to die snowboarding. It was a great career. I had a nice time, but I was really afraid. And even like with halfpipe, I could have been the first woman to do a backflip easily. I could have. It wasn't my body that stopped me. It was my mind. And, it took a level of maturity and experience to realize that, but there's a reason I'm telling you this, and it will make sense in a minute. So anyway, after that day in France, I really knew that I didn't want to snowboard anymore. So when I came back, I started going to Colorado Mountain College, and then when I got my degree, I transferred down to Boulder, and then I got more degrees, and then I got more degrees. And by the way, that snack food company happened in my junior year. I was sick. I was very, very sick. I couldn't keep food down for like a year. I had to actually carry a cup around me because I was always throwing up. It was awful. I couldn't keep food down, and nobody knew what was wrong. And this was really early on in the celiac gluten-free kind of days. And the nutritionist said, well, maybe you have a problem with gluten. Don't eat gluten. Don't eat sugar. You're clearly hypoglycemic. So you need to change how you eat. But when changing how I eat, I started using xylitol as a sweetener, and I stopped eating wheat, and I started making these cookies. And I'm pretty entrepreneurial, so one day I just thought, well, I should start selling these cookies. So I called them nut balls, NUTBALLZ, and I started making them and selling them. And then I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do out of college, so I'll just have this business. So I ended up with 7 employees, and we ended up in, like I said, 200 stores in 20 states, and then we promptly went bankrupt. Oh, no. It was not the entrepreneurial dream. I did end up selling the business, like the assets, but it wasn't like, nothing to write home about. Anyway, so I did that. I did the snack food company, and then I sold some rock climbing walls. That was really fun. It was great. What a rock star. I got to get on a plane at 6 a.m, give a presentation to architects with a lunch and learn at noon in like Texas, and then be home by dinner. That was a really cool job. Oh my gosh. And to be talking about climbing walls. Yeah. So that was fun. But then, moving on along, like you mentioned, I ended up getting a teaching job at the University of Colorado. I did that for a while. That was like my childhood dream, to be a teacher, but I didn't really have a mentor, and I didn't know what I was doing. And after 7 semesters, I really wasn't super excited about it. But during that time, my ex-husband Dylan and I, right before our wedding, we went to California with a friend, and she said, why don't we do flying trapeze today? And Dylan and I looked at each other and said, that sounds stupid. But we went and did it anyway. We did it anyway at Richie Gayona's Flying Trapeze School. We had such a fun time, both being afraid of heights, thinking this is kind of good therapy. When we got back to Denver, we went to Imperial Flyers, which is a flying trapeze club in Westminster. And there is, by the way, now a school, Mile High Trapeze, in Westminster as well. If anyone wants to try trapeze, I recommend going down to that school to give it a try. But we started going to Imperial Flyers, and we just loved the people. So it was our weekend thing to do, and we kind of got better and better and better. And, I started looking around and realizing, like, kind of good at this, and the reason I brought up that thing about fear with snowboarding was one of the thoughts I had was, what? I'm not going to let fear hold me back this time around. I don't care if other things hold me back, but the one thing that's not going to hold me back is fear. So what did I do? Well, I came up with a process that I was really able to believe in as I learned new tricks, so that I didn't have to be afraid. And my process was that I had to do 10 tricks in a row in safety lines without a mistake. And then if I made a mistake, I'd start over from number 1. And then I had to do those 10 tricks in a row to the net without the safety lines, without a mistake. And if I made a mistake, I'd start over with the 10 again. And then I could start throwing it to the catcher. And that was my process. And throughout my entire time that I've done trapeze, that process has served me really well.
But you have to explain what safety lines are and explain the whole thing.
Okay, yeah, good point.
It was only watching Circus. Okay.
Sure. So if you've seen a circus, flying trapeze is the thing that happens up in the sky. Yes, we have a net. That's the most frequent stupid question I get asked is, do we have a net? Yes, I don't want to die. We have a net. The net's dangerous. Like, you need to know how to be safe in the net, but we do have a net. So the trapeze is usually, the pedestal is usually like 28 feet in the air or something. The pedestal is where we stand to take off. And then there's a bar, and you swing on the bar. And then on the opposite end, there's a catcher who swings, and you do a release trick, and the catcher catches you, and you swing with the catcher, and then he throws you back to the bar, and then you go back to the pedestal. And that's kind of the basics. The show that I worked in Japan was a little different. We actually had 2 catchers. So the first catcher was the normal catcher, and he would actually throw me up to another catcher above him.
I saw that. I looked it up on YouTube. And this is insane because it's a second floor. And so he goes across this way and then back up here. Yeah.
Yeah. It's intense. Like, I have seen my teammates with the craziest one. My teammate Mauricio fell. When you fall from the top catcher, it kind of is a big deal because either if the most common way you fall is they just kind of get your hand or your fingers and then they lose it. And if that happens, it sends you into a spin, a flip. And remember, the bottom catcher is swinging away at that moment. So your spiraling down into the net at a bad angle. And every single time that would happen to me, I fell on my head. So I actually developed this thing that I would do if we missed. I would immediately do the neck brace thing that you're actually supposed to do in an avalanche. And I would go into the net on my head, but I was safe because I was braced. But Mauricio, my teammate once, however they lost it, the catcher must have lost his swing and he didn't quite get missed, but then he got dropped and he landed right in between the catcher's legs in the metal structure of the catch trap. Like, it was so crazy. Like Jesus. He looked like Jesus. He felt just like Jesus. It was so but the best part about that, he was a born performer. He was born in a circus family. He was so composed and so good that he climbed up, swung with the catcher, dropped down the hand, swung, and went back to the pedestal. He never hit the hand.
That's amazing. That's amazing. But starting out as a board person, all of that is kind of lower body and maneuvering, and I can see where gymnastics has a lot to do with that. But when you think about aerial and trapeze, it's all upper body. How did you prepare for all of that? And have you always been really strong in your upper body?
So a lot of ibuprofen. Well, okay, let's get one thing clear. I was never a good gymnast. Like I was at a trampoline room the other day and I could still do a back handspring full twist, but I wasn't small. It's funny because I'm 5'2". I'm not big, and my flying weight was like 107 pounds. So I'm kind of small now. But like in third grade, I was actually kind of big and dumpy and oafy. Like I wasn't like a little tiny gymnast body. That wasn't me. So I got out of gymnastics pretty quickly because the coaches just didn't care about me. I had some really bad coaches and they just were like, if you gain another pound, you can't do beam. And I'm like, oh, it's 12 years old, you know? Yeah, 10 years old. So I didn't go far in gymnastics. But I always had good proprioception. Proprioception means like your awareness, your spatial awareness. And I think that's the common thing between snowboarding, skateboarding, trapeze, everything. You need good proprioception. You need to know where your body is in space. And I think that's something that I've always kind of been blessed with. I do have a strong body. And like I said, I have that good body awareness, which has made me a halfway good rock climber. Trapeze is all about technique. You know, like, it's good to have strength, but it's better to have technique. And I'll tell you, before I joined the circus, I had no technique. I was such a dangly mess, hence not being good at gymnastics. I think one thing that being in the circus taught me was how to be coached. I didn't know how to be coached. So in those coaches' defense who didn't like me in gymnastics, maybe I wasn't the best student, but I had to learn how to be coached. And once I did learn how to be coached, my learning accelerated because I could understand that this coach is here to tell me what to do. It's not my job to give them a reason why I didn't do it that way. It's my job to go up the ladder and try, you know? So that's what I started doing, and it changed things a lot for me. There was a girl that was putting together an all-girl flying trapeze team. Her father was like the Ringling star, Miguel Cáceres, for years and years and years, and maybe the 80s, I want to say. He had the team with Ringling, and she was his daughter and worked on Ringling and did that kind of stuff. She was putting together an all-girl team. I wanted to be a catcher. I've mentioned that I'm kind of small, but at Imperial Flyers, I caught a lot because I was catching my friend Susan, who was the same weight as me. And I never worked in a show, so I didn't understand the rigors of a show and that you're doing 14 shows a week plus training, and you need to be able to catch people who are off time. And I never could have been a catcher. I didn't know that at the time. She hired me as a catcher, and I went down there to train for a month and live at her dad's house, which was a whole other thing. And she told me all the girls were going to be small. Well, I get down there and they're all huge. They're all way bigger than me. And Miguel, her father, first saw me flying, and he goes, honey, you're not a catcher, you're a flyer. It's like, oh, okay. So kind of shuffled things around down there. But that was a crazy adventure where she didn't even have the rig set up when I arrived. I expected to show up and we were going to train. Well, I ended up putting the rig up with her dad and her husband while she played video games inside. It was crazy. And then we put the rig up. The rig was Franken rig. We call it Franken rig because it was parts put together from all different rigs, and it was really unsafe. And then normally you have a hook you use to hook the bar when you're not using it. Well, she didn't have a hook, so we got a bunch of wire hangers out of her closet, bashing the look out of it. Funny, Susan is my best flying friend. She flew down, and we're always having an adventure together. Well, she and I are there talking to Miguel, and Miguel's telling us what we need to go to Home Depot and buy for the rig. And he says to us, "You need shackles." And we're like, okay, chuckles. Yeah, chuckles. So we go to Home Depot and we go to the guy, we need chuckles. Where do you have chuckles? And he's like, chuckles? I'm like, yeah, chuckles. So he's like leading us around the store trying to help us find these chuckles. Turns out he said heckles, not chuckles. So we're running around trying to find chuckles. And then, that was just such a crazy adventure. We were staying in a hotel room that had when my friend Susan visited, that had a magnet on the refrigerator that I guess you were supposed to put on your door if you left and you had a pet in the room. But it was a magnet that said pet inside, and it was on the freezer. Didn't want to find out what kind of pet was in the freezer. The whole thing was just such a disaster. After that, I came back to Colorado, and it was cold at Christmas. And so one Christmas, it was cold. So when New Year's rolled around, I told my husband, I'm going to go to California. I'm going to fly a little bit. The semester doesn't start for a few weeks. So I packed up the car, drove to California with my 2 dogs, and got an Airbnb and figured maybe I'll meet someone. And that's when I met Harmony. It just happened. Harmony had just had her second baby. Her second baby was like 4 months old at the time, and her first daughter was like a year. And she was training to get back in shape to go join this team in Japan. And after flying together for a day, she called me and she said, "Hey, we need another girl. Do you want to come?" And I didn't even have to ask my husband. I was like, yes, I'm going to come. And she said it's a 1-year contract and this and that, whatever. And I'm like, sure, I don't care, whatever. So I ended up joining the team. And that's how I ended up getting that contract.
Yeah. And so you lived in 39 different cities in Japan while you were there? That's amazing. And how was it different from what you had done before?
My gosh, I mean, it can't compare at all. So this circus was a Japanese traveling circus, and we all lived there, 60 of us. That included the Japanese staff, which was probably about 30 people, then 20 people, and then 40 of us who were we were like the United Nations. We were from everywhere. Well, maybe not quite the United Nations. Russia was there. Like really from every country. We had Chile, we had Colombia, we had Russia, we had Argentina, we had... so we lived in shipping containers that were divided into little apartments. So just in my container, 30-foot long container, 3 apartments, I had a girl from Argentina next to me, and then a girl from Russia. And we still to this day are friends. And the containers had like a little awning that you'd flip out, and we all built our little kitchens outside. So when it was time to move to a new city, a truck would come and pick up the container, put it on the truck and move it, which was way better than living in a hotel because our house just went with us everywhere we went. So that was amazing. But you can imagine living in a shipping container in Japan. Japan has very wild weather. It's very, cold in the winter and hot in the summer, and typhoons. And I weathered 6 typhoon seasons in those shipping containers. And I give the craziest stories about the typhoons. I can remember one time we were in rental containers actually in Sendai. We had just gotten there. We were setting up for the show. I had shingles. It was horrible. North Korea was launching rockets over us into the Japan Sea. The air raid warnings were going off all the time. And there was a typhoon. And I had to keep waking my husband. He was my boyfriend at the time. And so in between this whole story, I got divorced. We're still friends. And I have a new husband. We didn't get married till after, but I'm going to call him my husband because he's my husband now. Boyfriend at the time. I had to keep waking him up we would hang tarps in between the containers, so when we walked around, we wouldn't get wet in our costumes, but the tarps would sag and water would get stuck in the middle, and I would have to send my husband out in the middle of the night to poke it with a broom to try to get the water off so the ropes didn't break. So it was, and then another typhoon, we would all get together on weekends, maybe after the 3rd show or on a weekday after our last show. After training, we'd get together to watch RuPaul in my container. That was kind of our fun thing to do. We'd play Uno and we'd watch RuPaul, and we'd all blame farts on my dog. 100% at times. But the last RuPaul night we ever had before I left the show was a typhoon. And it was nuts. We actually were worried about our cars getting sloshed together from the water. Bridges were breaking at the airport. Like, the typhoon was crazy. And there we are just sitting in our shipping container watching RuPaul and eating ice cream.
You performed in tents, correct?
Yeah. So our containers were arranged around the tents, and it was like a good sized tent. It also had a midway, so I had like one of the smaller tents where they sold stuff in the front. So yeah, and the tent would come with us everywhere we went. I think the tent seated like, gosh, maybe 1,000 people.
Wow. They were big tents. And then how was it performing in a tent during those typhoons?
That's a great question. If was a thing. One time we were in the city called Akita, which if any of your listeners are ever going to visit Japan, I highly recommend Akita. It's not somewhere you hear about, but it's very rural. It has wonderful onsens. The food is great. The people are lovely. They're way different people than Tokyo people because it's a country. But we were out there. We were actually right on a beach and we were performing and it was typhoon season. And I remember one of my memories that is most vivid is Harry and Jeremy had a kiddie pool for their kids that they would fill up and we'd all sit in the kiddie pool in between shows and stuff. Well, this kiddie pool, a pretty big kiddie pool, when I came out of my house during this typhoon was floating around the parking lot. And the next morning it was beached on a chair, but it was crazy. So the typhoon came. There were several. That was one of the first ones, but the last typhoon in that city came on our last day of shows. And I'll never forget because I had bought tickets for the third show for some friends of mine. And I always threw away the receipt because what do I need a receipt for? They're going to come to the show. And anyway, a typhoon hit that morning and we did the first show. I remember being so scared because the tent is shifting back and forth. Yeah, we'd take off the pedestal and we'd swing and the catcher would be like misaligned with us because the tent was moving so much. Water was dripping down. Water was on the bar. It was insane that we did that show. But my teammates seemed totally fine. So I was like, well, I guess we're fine. I'm not going to win. Everyone's fine. When we got backstage, everyone was like, oh my God. I was like, you guys, it was fine. So yeah, typhoons were a real thing. What usually would happen and what happened right after that show, the reason I told you I bought tickets for friends and threw away the receipt was because we took the tent down right after that show and then I didn't have the receipt so I couldn't get refunded for my tickets. I know, but normally we would take the tent down. Like when we heard a tent was coming, we would take the tent down, but they were trying to get those last two shows done because it was the last day. Yeah, so there's a whole protocol for taking the tent down.
And you did more than one show in a day?
We did 14 shows a week. Yeah.
14 shows a week.
14 shows a week plus four days of training also.
So when did you get a chance to rest your body? Did you get any downtime or?
We had 1 day off per week. And then between cities, we would have 2 weeks. So, well, the boys wouldn't have 2 weeks because they'd be doing the rigging, but I really wasn't very useful with rigging. So I never did much rigging. But yeah, so we would have 1 day off a week. Training was much harder than the shows. I mean, what a lot of people don't realize, I just was coaching some kids here. We're in Mexico right now at our condo in Mexico. I was coaching some kids here who were doing acro yoga shows. They wanted to do their hardest trick at the show. And I was like, that is not how you do it. Nobody cares, right? What they care about is just, did you fall over or didn't you? If you didn't fall over, then you were successful. So right. Don't do your hardest trick. So in the shows, we would be doing our my catch rate for my double flip was 98%. That's what you want to be at in a show. It's okay to miss once in a while, but you don't want to be missing regularly. Then in practice, we'd work hard. We'd work hard on the things we were learning. So practice was actually harder than the shows.
Okay, that makes sense. I have to ask you though, given your fear of heights, I would say we probably got away with it in snowboarding, but once you got up on that tower or platform, how do you take that flying leap, literally, across this vast amount of space? How do you do that? You just visualize it, or how do you mentally prepare for that?
Well, when you really want something, you do crazy things for it, right? And I would say, I'll tell you 2 things. One, the worst part for me was when I had to start with the top catcher. Sometimes I would actually start the show at the top with the top catcher. His feet were like 40 feet high. And I was on this little ledge that was kind of over the edge of the net. which was super scary. So I would be holding on as tight as I possibly could when I was up there. I did not like that. But you get accustomed to your surroundings. So for me, doing shows in the tent with the net out was fine. I was comfortable. If I had to do rigging when the net wasn't out, I was not comfortable. I didn't like it when I had to go up there. Some people didn't mind. I kind of minded, but I would try. I would push myself to do it. I left the show for a little while. I had a little bit of a falling out with the catcher. I ended up staying at, my first contract was a year. I ended up staying for like 2 years and maybe 3 or 4 months. But the catcher, I don't want to call someone a sociopath on a podcast, but I just did. He had a lot of problems. And this was also, and he was the time when I wasn't very good at being coached, so I'm sure I was a pain in the butt too. So it was oil and water. We had such a hard relationship, and he started asking me to do things that felt unsafe. And one day we got into such a bad fight that the whole circus heard me screaming, "I effing quit!" And poor Jeremy, our top catcher, got roped into the conversation, and there's a lot of yelling and screaming and whatever. Anyway, I made sure there was someone to replace me. I stayed till the end of the city. She came in, replaced me, and I left. And then for 9 months, I worked with a different team. And then I also bought an RV, and my best friend and I took a trip from, she met up with me in Indianapolis in this RV, and we went all down through the Southwest, all the way up the West Coast, all the way to Seattle. And so I got invited back to the show by Harmony and her husband, Jeremy, because they bought the team and they invited me to come back. So I felt vindicated. But
Wow.
why did I bring this up? Because during the time that I was working with the other team in the United States, I was doing shrine shows. Well, at Pop Circus, I only had to do my act, but at shrine shows, the flying trapeze girls are required to do other acts. And this is one of the misnomers about circus performers. People think, "You're a flying trapeze artist, here's some balls, juggle for me." I don't know how to juggle, like, I'm not a juggler. I'm a flying trapeze artist. The people who were born in circus grow up in circus, they generally tend to learn a lot of different acts because they work in the family show and they need to be able to, come on stage a bunch of times. I'm not that person. I know how to do flying trapeze. So when the Cortez asked me, "Do you know how to do Lyra?" Which is the hoop in the sky, I said, "Well, I'm sure I can learn. I don't do it, but I'm sure I can do it." I did one show once where I had to do Lyra for like a minute. Okay, so when I joined the show, I had to do Lyra. These were huge arenas, like basketball stadiums that we were performing in, and I had to do Lyra at the ceiling with no net underneath, no safety, no nothing.
No net.
It's a hoop that hangs in the sky, and you do like different positions and movements and whatever on it. And this one even had
I know what you're talking about.
you know what I'm talking about? And this one even had an ankle loop, which you better put on properly or you're going to fall. And I had to use an ankle loop, not knowing how to do any of this, at the top of an arena.
This is more like aerial fabric, isn't it? Where you twist around and you do all these movements on. Oh my God, that's insane! And you did
it's a single point act at the top of the arena that I don't know how to do, but I have to do it because I said I would do it, and here I am doing it in front of 50,000 people or whatever. It was so crazy.
So that's probably even more depth-defying.
Oh, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. But I did it because I wanted to be in the show, right? I lived in horrible living conditions with that team. I really suffered. We did 5 shows a day at the Jacksonville State Fair. That was crazy. It was the loneliest months of my life working for this team, but I wanted to be in the show so bad I was willing to suffer it. It was awful.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so you also did trapeze at the same time, or just you did both?
No. Yeah, I had to do both in the show, and I had to take tickets for the elephants, which I absolutely hated. I don't like animals in circuses, but again, it was part of the job, right? Either I can do it or they'll get somewhere else. And the crazy thing is my trailer, the one show, was parked right next to the elephant tent. And if you can imagine sleeping right next to elephants thinking, is this some stampede that's going to walk through my trailer? It's pretty scary.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy. But when you were in the United States, you must have had a lot of friends coming out to see you, and it must have been kind of fun to be in the home area, or was it still pretty much just a big adventure where you're going from city to city? And
No, I had way more friends visit me in Japan, and also I worked in Germany for a month, and I had a friend visit there. But in the U.S., I don't know anyone in Jacksonville, or no, not Jackson. Sorry, not Jacksonville, Jackson, Mississippi. Yeah, no, I don't know anyone there. I didn't know anyone. It was a very isolating and kind of awful experience, but I'm glad I did it. Jackson was interesting. Jackson was a really interesting town, actually. It's kind of beautiful in a very rundown kind of way. But it was cool, yeah.
I have to ask you, so through all of your experiences and all this death-defying stuff that most of us can't imagine doing, how has this played a part in your new career, which is your coaching, your resume writing, and tell me about that. And how do you motivate the people that you work with? How does it play a part in all of that?
I think all of our experiences in life are cumulative, right? They all make up who we are. And so I believe that the value I can offer people, and well, clearly I have a lot of experience changing careers, right? And I know it can be done with enough tenacity. Oh, I talk to people a lot about, if you want to do this change, you want to do this. Well, what do you need to get from point A to point B? Who do you need to know? What skills do you need to get that you don't already have? And what's going to keep you on that path to get you there? How bad do you want it? The majority of what I do is writing. I generally write a lot of resumes, LinkedIn profiles, and I do job interview coaching. Writing has been something I've always been engaged with. I had a blog when I was in the circus, which I'm so stupid. I shut down my server, my account, and I lost all my posts, which I thought I wouldn't care. And what a stupid thing. Of course I care, I'm pretty devastated about that. But I've always wanted to be a writer. And at one point I actually applied for a Master of Fine Arts program. I did not get in. And, it wasn't really that much of a surprise. I had to write poetry and things for the application. I don't know how to write poetry. But anyway, so I applied. I didn't get in. And I find it ironic that now my career, I write, my job is writing, and I have a more successful career than probably the majority of people that have gone to that Master of Fine Arts program, and that are trying to be a fiction writer or something, which is a horribly difficult job. I'm doing writing. It is creative writing, surprisingly. Like when you write a resume, there's a lot of critical thinking that has to go into it and creativity. And I'm helping a lot of people through it. So I'm actually really grateful that things worked out the way they did. And I write about 300 resumes a year. So I mentioned I was traveling with my best friend in the trailer for those months in 2015, and we started writing resumes at that time because living in an RV life, the glamorous RV life, is a lot more expensive than you think it is. So we need to make some money. So we started writing resumes. It turned out she hated it and I loved it. So you can imagine me in my little shipping container after I went back to the circus with my sparkles on, with my fake lashes on, with my fake hair on, in my costume, knocking away at the keys to write someone's resume. My clients had no idea that that's who was writing their resume.
It must be for Zoom calls.
Yeah, I definitely could not take Zoom calls at that time. But yeah, it was, I loved it. I've always loved having an intellectual and a physical pursuit, and working the circus was the perfect balance for me because I got to do both. I got to write resumes and I got to train and I got to do trapeze. I had to leave the circus when I was 40. So I started working in the circus when I was
amazing to you're 40. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, I know. And what was cool and sad also about that time was I had just learned the triple, which is kind of the pinnacle of female flying trapeze, to do a triple flip and catch it. It's very difficult. And I was right there. We had touched hands. We were almost there. And I had to stop because my body just was falling apart.
Oh, no.
Anyway, at that time, I had to leave the show. When I got back to the U.S., I didn't know what to do with myself. And I thought, well, I already have resumes. I might as well continue. Over time, it just turned into a blossoming career. I dedicate a pretty substantial part of my income and time every year to continuing development. So I try to offer my clients as much as I can and just keep growing with them, right? So I can keep up with today's trends, all this AI stuff happening and everything. And yeah, it's really exciting, actually. And I feel like I bring that same enthusiasm and excitement to writing resumes as I did to trapeze. It's a different kind of love, But with trapeze, it really was grieving a loss when I left the show. It took me years to get over it. I'm kind of over it now. And I'm glad.
2020 when you quit, was that?
No,
18.
Yeah.
18. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But it wasn't until 2020 that maybe I even could accept that I wasn't going back.
oh, so you're still snowboarding, skateboarding, those types? You're not snowboarding either?
I haven't snowboarded since probably the year 2002. Yeah, no, I don't need cold weather anymore. It's hard. Like I mentioned, we spend most of our time in Mexico now. Still we come up to Boulder a lot, but I like the Mexico weather.
That's great. So what are your challenges now, or what are you looking towards in the future? Is this enough? What you're doing now is enough. Maybe you've had a lot in your life and just kind of want to chill for a while. I don't know, you tell me.
No, come on. If you're a driven person like I am, you can't just. I mean, yeah, I tell people it's my fantasy, but that's not true at all. I'm 45 now. I had a little girl a year and a half ago. So she is just the light of our lives. Thank you. We are already grooming her to go to the circus. Yeah, my husband does all sorts of hand balancing with her and things. My husband is doing a Rolla Bola act, and I am his lovely assistant. Rolla Bola is like it's a bunch of cylinders stacked on top of each other, and you balance on top of them. He's doing that act now. As for me, so the reason I moved to San Miguel, where we are now, San Miguel de Allende, is I met a group of old lady circus enthusiasts who are like between the ages of maybe 55 and 70, who get together a few times a week and do Lyra and fabric and all the other things. So I get together with them, and I learn the things that I should have known in the circus, like how to do Lyra. With my old lady friends. And so my husband and I are doing agro yoga together, which is like partner yoga. It's kind of like hand balancing. He lays on his back and I do tricks on top of him. So we're still very active and having fun, but do I miss the circus? Of course I do.
Well, it sounds like it was a very exciting part of your life, and it will continue to be in the future.
There's always something. Who knows where life will take her.
Exactly. Did you have any other wild stories to tell before?
Oh boy. It's a pretty, I'll tell you my wild story of life in Mexico. So you got to be careful where you drive here. We were going to our friend's house the other day, and she lives in a place that has like a gate in the front. The gate was open, but there was a cow blocking the road, so we couldn't get to her house. And I had to get the cow out of the way. But today I was going to pick my daughter up from daycare, and this huge, when I say huge, I mean like 15-foot long, 7-foot high advertisement fell over across the road like a gate. And I needed to get to the daycare to pick up my daughter. I'm out there by myself in the road. It's the only, there's no way around it. I have to get it out of the road. So I'm wrestling with it, and I fell onto an agave plant, and it got me in the head. It got me in the arm.
Wow.
I got the thing out of the road, but I got attacked by an agave plant today, going to pick my daughter up from daycare.
That would not happen in Boulder.
It would not. The plants here are very pointy.
Wow.
And that was my crazy story for today.
That's good. I mean, wild things are happening to everyone all the time. So that's why I have this podcast, so that people are inspired to embrace their wild sides and remember all those crazy things that happen to us, because they do shape who we are, and they do build that confidence, and that's something to be proud of.
100%. I don't know if you know the YouTubers, they're called Yes Theory. Have you heard of them?
No, I don't think so.
I just love that Yes Theory. The whole idea is just saying yes to things and having experiences in your life. And I feel like that's a lot of what your podcast is about, and sharing these stories. It's just, Brooke and I, my husband, we're like homebodies. We love hanging out at home, but every single time we go out of the house, whether it's walking around the neighborhood or going to Centro or whatever, Centro is the center part of town, wherever, we always have some wonderful magical adventure. You know what I mean? And it's that simple. It doesn't always have to be flying to New Zealand or Chile or getting on a helicopter or whatever. Just getting out of your house, sometimes you can have those adventures. And I just love that about life.
That's great. That's what I live for.
Me too.
I love it. Well, was there anything else you wanted to mention? Where people could find you online?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my website is my name, Kyla Duffy, KylaDuffy.com. That's KYLADUFFY.com. I'm happy to help anyone with their career stuff. Again, generally resumes, LinkedIn's, interview prep, but also I help people find their path, those kind of things. Yeah, always happy to share a good story.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time today, Kyla. I know you're very busy, and I really appreciated this. I know that people listening or watching today really enjoyed it too, and inspire us to embrace our wild sides and get out there and go for it and take the opportunity for that next adventure that comes our way.
Yes, for sure. I wish unbridled adventures on all your listeners.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And until next time, remember to embrace your wild side. And if you have a story to tell, reach out, and you can find me at susielindow.com or susielindow@gmail.com. So have a good one, Wild Riders. Production and musical score of The Wild Side by Kelly Lindau. Visit my website at susielindow.com. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram, or tweet me about the show at Susie Lindow, and I'll follow you back. If you enjoyed The Wild Side, be sure to tell your friends, family, or anyone who will listen. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Thanks so much for listening.